Hey everybody, and thank you for joining me for another tier list. We have a very fun episode for you today. We're going to be going through the discography of Abba. Abba has got to be the most popular band to come out of Sweden, and in my opinion, they are one of the most intricate and unique sounding pop bands of all time, and they really found that perfect balance of writing songs that are catchy, but also very pleasing and adventurous from a musical perspective, and finding that delicate balance in pop music is a very hard thing to do, and I think they are one of the greatest examples of a band that captured just that. They have countless hits and a very impressive discography for their initial 9-year stint, and then their surprise return album from 2021. And they are one of the few bands that I will say I have never heard anyone have a bad thing to say about them, and I think they've really made their mark in the world of pop music and are a very important voice that influenced and continue to influence countless artists and groups. So what I'm going to do is go through their 9 studio albums, starting with Ring Ring and going up to Voyage, and I will score each of them on this tier list, with S being the highest and D being the lowest, and I'll talk a little bit about each album, let you know my thoughts, and we will see where we end up. And feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments as well, where you agree and disagree and how you would rank these 9 albums. I would love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know. Alright, I think that's about it. Let's jump right into it. Okay, we will start out with their debut studio album from 1973 titled Ring Ring, and I will give this one a B. I have conflicting thoughts about this album because this is generally regarded as one of their worst albums by a lot of the ABBA fans, and I do agree with a lot of the general critiques of this record, but on the flip side, I also think that this album does have a handful of really awesome tracks, and I do think that it is a little bit better than some people give it credit for. At this point, they were operating under the name Bjorn, Benny, and Jette and Anna Fried, and they were very much still figuring out their sound, which resulted in a variety of different stylistic choices from song to song, which I would say doesn't necessarily translate into a very clearly defined and coherent album. And in addition to that, we have Bjorn and Benny singing on way more songs than they do on future releases, which I would say is one of the main things that makes this album sound so much different from a lot of the future ABBA releases. From an instrumental perspective, the guitar is much more prevalent throughout this, and there hadn't been the addition of the synthesizers yet, which I would say is another key part of that classic ABBA sound. So when it comes to the general critiques of this album, I do agree with most of it, but on the flip side, I also do think there are a few more good songs on this album than some people give it credit for, and I honestly really enjoy most of side 1. I think every track on here is enjoyable in its own ways. We have a couple of songs that do give us flavors of what's to eventually become the ABBA sound, with tracks like Ring Ring and Nina Pretty Ballerina. We have a couple of songs with prominent male vocal leads from Bjorn and Betty, with songs like Another Town, Another Train, and I Saw It in the Mirror. I think Another Town, Another Train has a really peaceful and serene quality to it. I love the mood of this track, and I think the flute adds a nice additional layer of sweetness to the sound. People Need Love is another standout track from side 1 for me. Great combinations of the male and female vocals, and just a solid and catchy pop song. And this was the single from this album and ended up being a small hit for the band. So as far as side 1 goes, I really have no issues with it. Like I said, stylistically, I do think it is a little bit all over the place, but I do think each of these songs is really enjoyable on their own. I would have preferred all female vocals right from the beginning, but at the same time, I don't mind the male vocal tracks for what they are, and I do enjoy some of side 2 as well, but I would say that this is the weaker part of the album. I still do like most of it, but there are 2 tracks that don't really do anything for me, with Me and Bobby's Brother and He Is Your Brother. Other than that though, I do think the other 4 songs are very enjoyable. Love Isn't Easy has a really catchy and feel-good chorus. She's My Kind of Girl has a cool, almost 60s psychedelic rock vibe to it, and I really love the vocal harmonies and how they blend against the instrumentation. I Am Just a Girl is, believe it or not, my favorite song on this album. I think the vocal melodies on this one are just absolutely beautiful, and I love the mellow, laid-back mood of this track. I think this is a super underappreciated ABBA song, and I'm curious if anybody else loves this song as much as I do. And I really enjoy the closing track, Rock and Roll Band, as well. Another one with a great vibe and a very catchy chorus. I do think it becomes more apparent on side 2 how different the styles can be from track to track as well. I would say side 1 is a little bit more cohesive, and I don't necessarily think think that every song works well together on this, and that would be the main critique from me that does take away from this album a little bit and put it in B tier. But in the midst of them writing music and trying to figure out their sound and style, I do think that they produced a lot of really great individual tracks that I would consider to still be very high quality ABBA songs, regardless of whether or not it sounds like how they would sound on albums to follow it. But I still do think that this album is better than a lot of people give it credit for, and I can listen back to this one and get a lot of enjoyment out of a lot of these individual tracks. So not a bad debut album in my opinion, but also not one of their best works, so I will give this one a B. Alright, next we have their second studio album from 1974 titled Waterloo, and unfortunately I'm going to give this one a C. Not the greatest follow-up to Ring Ring, in my opinion, and I have very conflicting thoughts on this one as well because, again, I think there are some really great individual tracks on here, and I do think that they do get closer to finding their sound on this album. But in the midst of that, I do think that this one has more underwhelming and skip-over tracks than Ring Ring did, and I know a lot of people typically put Ring Ring as their worst album, and then usually this one will follow it, so I do tend to find myself in the minority with this opinion, but I do think that Ring Ring is a little bit stronger. We still have the prevalent male vocals throughout this, but the main differentiation for me between this one and the previous album is that I like the male vocal songs more on Ring Ring than I do on this one. Of the songs with Bjorn and Benny singing, the only one that I really enjoy on this is Dance While the Music Still Goes On. Their other two vocal tracks, Sitting in the Palm Tree and King Kong Song, really put a damper on side one for me. But in the midst of that, we have some incredible tracks on side one as well, like Waterloo, which won them the Eurovision contest and was ultimately the song that launched their career and put them on the map. It went to number 1 in Britain and even got to number 10 in the United States. Absolutely incredible song, and I would say the best song that they've written up to this point in their discography, and one of the first tracks that very clearly articulates that classic ABBA sound. Another standout track for me on side one is My Mama Said. I think that one has a really eerie and mysterious vibe that I love so much, and great instrumental layering throughout the song with great keyboard and guitar writing. Similar to how I feel about Ring Ring, I do think side 2 on here takes an even bigger dip in momentum. With the exception of the remix of Waterloo, the only other song on side 2 that I really enjoy would be Gonna Sing You My Love Song, which would definitely be my second favorite song on here. And the only other one I would say I don't mind is Susie Hang Around, but I wouldn't say it's a standout track either. Other than that, though, unfortunately, the second side has really never done anything for me and is ultimately why I put it in C tier as opposed to B. So I do think that this album has a couple of really awesome songs, and Waterloo would make my top 10 favorite ABBA songs, and it is the clear standout track from this album. But unfortunately, I think there are just too many skip-over songs on here in the grand scheme of the album, and I do consider it to be a downgrade in quality from the previous release. So not one of my favorites of theirs. This one will get a C. Okay, continuing, we have their third studio album from 1975, which is a self-titled album called ABBA, and I will give this one a B. Not a bad album, still not one of their best, but I would say it is an improvement from Waterloo. It still has a handful of skip-over tracks for me, but I think that at this point they have settled more into their sound. The male vocals are very minimal throughout this, and it seems like the success of Waterloo and the launch of their career had helped to solidify what sort of stylistic direction they were going to take moving forward. I think half of side 1 is incredible, and then the other half doesn't really do much for me. The 3 tracks that I really enjoy are Mamma Mia, SOS, and Bang a Boomerang. All really incredible tracks. Mamma Mia would have to be my favorite from this album, and that ended up being another breakthrough track for them and reached number 1 in the UK. I'm not crazy about Hey Hey Helen. Tropical Love Land feels sort of out of place to me, putting a reggae song as the third track on the album. And Man in the Middle is another one of the male vocal songs that I do find kind of boring. So if I was to compare side 1 from the first 3 albums, I honestly still think that Ring Ring has the strongest first side. I know some people will disagree with that, and I would agree that Waterloo and Self-Titled do have higher quality individual tracks from side 1, but as far as just a full side side of music with as little skip over moments as possible, I still do find myself preferring Ring Ring compared to these two albums. For side 2, I really love I Do, I Do, I Do, I Do, I Do, and I've Been Waiting for You. The instrumental track Intermezzo number 1 is cool, but I wouldn't say it's a track that I go back to very often. But Rock Me and So Long are the two other tracks that have never done anything for me, and in general, anytime their songs have more of that driving rock and roll sort of feel, I usually tend to resonate with those sorts of ABBA songs the least, which is just a stylistic preference on my part, but I do think that this album still does have its share of boring skip-over tracks, but I would say that the standout tracks on here are an even further improvement from the previous two releases, with the exception of Waterloo. I still think that's the strongest song that they've put out to this point, but I do think that the good songs on this one are definitely an upgrade from some of the good songs from the previous two releases, and it does feel like they have settled into their sound more, and it has set up a nice trajectory for their albums to continue to build off of. So not one of their best albums, but not one of their worst, so I will give this one a B. Alright, next we have their fourth studio album from 1976 titled Arrival, and this one gets an easy S. Absolutely incredible album. This one goes down as my third favorite ABBA album, and when you look at this record compared to the previous release, in my opinion, this is one of the biggest improvements I've ever seen a band make from one album to the next. They are completely settled into their sound at this point and are just delivering top quality pop songs, also adding a little bit of disco elements as well, which was starting to become a much more popular style at this time. And a few of these songs would end up being some of their most classic hits of all time. I think side 1 is perfect. Every song is awesome and contrasts and complements one another very nicely. When I Kissed the Teacher is a beautiful opener with a great drive to it and really colorful vocal melodies and chord movements. Then to follow it up, we have Dancing Queen, which is ABBA's most well-known song of all time. I don't think anyone would dispute that. An absolute classic. And this song would go on to hit number 1 and really boosted their profile and gave their music a ton of new ears. Then My Love, My Life brings the tempo down a bit and provides a nice change of pace, and I think this song has a real sweetness about it. I absolutely love this track. Dum Dum Diddle is another beautiful song. I love the types of synth sounds that they're incorporating on this. Another improvement that I think starts to happen from this album moving forward is the continued experimentation with different synthesizer sounds, and that's another thing that I think is a key ingredient of the ABBA sound. And then side 1 concludes with Knowing Me, Knowing You, the perfect vibe to end on, with a more mysterious song with a verse that's in a minor key, which provides a nice change in color from the moods of the other 4 songs. I think the entirety of side 1 is just spotless. Every single track on here is amazing. And then for side 2, they give us another 5 tracks, opening up with another one of their most classic hits, Money, Money, Money. Just the perfect opener and another one of the standout tracks on here. And then it goes into That's Me, which is another great example of an ABBA song that has some really interesting chord movements, weaving in and out of all sorts of interesting tonalities, and another one that is a great example of that experimentation with new synthesizer sounds. After that, we have the one song on here that I've never been a fan of, Why Did It Have to Be Me? Like I said before, I never really resonate with them doing that old school rock and roll vibe, and if this one song wasn't on here, I would comfortably say that this album is perfect, but unfortunately this has always been the one track that puts a little damper on side 2 for me, but luckily after that we wrap it up with 2 more incredible tracks, Tiger and the title track, Arrival. Tiger has some really cool contrasting vibes going on with some more feel-good poppy moments, but also some more eerie and mysterious parts like the single-note guitar riffs that happen in the chorus. Another example of a song that provides a great little detour in mood from what we heard up to this point. And then Arrival has got to be my favorite closing song of any ABBA album. This is one of only 2 instrumental tracks that ABBA has ever done, but the melody on this one is just so unbelievably beautiful, and the instrumental instrumentation and vocal harmonies create such a lush and dreamy atmosphere. The perfect closer to an absolutely incredible album that I would say is a really close to perfect album, other than that one track on side 2. But I think the other 9 songs are just incredible and classic ABBA tracks. And for me, this one would go down as my 3rd favorite ABBA record, like I said. So incredible album. This one will get an easy S. Alright, next we have their 5th studio album from 1977 titled Abba The Album, and I will also give this one an S. Another amazing record and a very good follow-up to Arrival that still maintains that high quality of songwriting but also contrasts it very nicely from a stylistic perspective. This one still has those classic poppy ABBA elements to it, but it also does take on a more artsy flavor, and I would say from track to track on this one, it is a bit harder to anticipate what is coming next. This album was released along with Abba the Movie, so a lot of the songs on here were part of the soundtrack for that, and it also features 3 songs from their mini musical titled The Girl with the Golden Hair. I think side 1 is very strong. I enjoy all 4 songs. Eagle is a very cool opener, one of my favorites from the album. Take a Chance on Me follows it up very nicely with a classic feel-good poppy ABBA track. One Man, One Woman takes the tempo down nicely and gives us a pretty ballad to contrast the higher energy of the opening 2 songs. And then The Name of the Game wraps up side 1 on a really nice groovy track with more of a down tempo. Side 2 then features 5 more tracks, with the first 2 being additional songs and then the remaining 3 being the songs from the mini musical. And side 2 is interesting because it starts out with my favorite song from the album and then it's followed by my least favorite song from the album. The opener, Move On, is hands down my favorite track on here. This one has such beautiful and colorful vocal melodies, and I really love the groove to this song. A very peaceful and serene track, in my opinion. For Hole in Your Soul, I definitely wouldn't say it's a bad track, but for me personally, this has always been the least standout song from this album. And then that is followed by the 3 tracks from the mini musical, and I really enjoy all 3 of these. Thank You for the Music and I Wonder are both very pretty. And then I'm a Marionette is a very cool song both from a musical and instrumental standpoint. All sorts of interesting sounds being utilized and a lot of colorful and exotic harmonic movements and vocal melodies. Probably the most art rock track of the album and a song that I would say sounds pretty different from the typical ABBA flavorings, but I think it's done in a very tasteful and effective manner. So I do think that this is a very high quality album. I would say that I do like it a little bit less than Arrival. I do think Arrival is stronger and more cohesive throughout, and one of the main critiques that I have heard some people say about this album is that it's a little bit random at times and doesn't have the best flow, and I can see where people are coming from with that, but I still think that there is a lot of this album that does flow well together, and in the tracks where it does veer off a little bit, I still think that they are all very high quality tracks, and I don't mind hearing that side of ABBA at all, and I think that they still managed to produce some incredibly high quality songs throughout this. So another amazing album. This one gets an S. Alright, moving on, we have their 6th studio album from 1978 titled Voulez Vous, and I will give this one an A. I know some people are going to disagree with this take, and fans do seem to be divided on this album more than others. I do still think that this is a great record, and I do enjoy most of the songs on here, but for me personally, there are a couple of reasons as to why I put it in A tier instead of S. It does have a couple of songs that I don't find that interesting, and for me this is one of those ABBA albums that I need to be in a particular mood to listen to, whereas all of the albums that are going to be in S tier I could put on at any time regardless of my mood, but I do find that with this one I need to be in the right mood to listen to it in its entirety. But as far as individual songs go, there are certainly some exceptional tracks throughout this. Stylistically, this one contains the same pop sensibilities that we heard on certain tracks from the previous 2 albums, and is also incorporating some more of those disco elements on a few songs, and we hear that right on the opening track, As Good as New, which brings the album in very nicely. I've always particularly loved the pre-chorus of this track, and I also really love the string parts underneath the vocal melody of the chorus. Then that is followed by the title track, Voulez Vous, which changes gears and gives us more of that mysterious vibe, and this is another amazing track. And then we have I Have a Dream, which is another classic ABBA hit, and definitely one of the high points of the album for me. And then that is followed by another beautiful track titled Angel Eyes, which has some of the catchiest vocal melodies of the album, in my opinion. And up to this point, I think the opening 4 tracks are absolutely spotless. I have no issues with the album up to this point. But after that, we have track 5 titled The King Has Lost His Crown, and this would definitely be my least favorite song of side 1. Certainly not a bad song, but in comparison to everything else that we've heard up to this point, this would be the least standout track for me. Side 2 then opens up with Does Your Mother Know? And I know most people love this song, but for some reason I've just never been blown away by it. I'm not sure what it is about this track, but it really just doesn't resonate with me as much as it does with other people for some reason. I know a lot of people are probably going to disagree with that take. But I absolutely love the follow-up track titled If It Wasn't for the Nights. This is definitely my favorite song on this album. And again, another track that I think has exceptionally beautiful vocal melodies and a very colorful, pretty, and really blissful sounding chorus that just puts me in such a great mood. I'm curious if anyone else loves this song as much as I do, because I feel like it's sort of a random song to be a favorite pick from this album, and I feel like I'm in the minority with that opinion, similar to I'm Just a Girl from the first album, so I'm curious if anyone else agrees with me on that. After that, we have Chiquitita, which is a really pretty ballad that changes gears nicely and is a great track to set up the final 2 songs of the album, which continues with Lovers Live a Little Longer. For me, this is one of those songs where I really only enjoy the chorus, and other than that, I find it kind of underwhelming, but I do think the chorus has a very cool vocal melody and interesting harmonic movements. And then the album concludes with Kisses of Fire, which I think is another high point from side 2, in particular with the chorus, just a very beautiful and serene chorus, and a really great song to wrap up the album. So as you can see, there are a couple of tracks and moments within these songs that do make this album lose a tiny bit of momentum for me. And for me, side 1 is the stronger side of the 2, but both sides offer some really amazing individual songs like Voulez Vous, I Have a Dream, Angel Eyes, If It Wasn't for the Nights, and Kisses of Fire. So still a great album, but I do need to be in a particular mood to listen to it, and it does have those 2 tracks that I find kind of underwhelming, so I would say it is a slight downgrade from the previous 2 releases, but still great nonetheless, so I will give this one an A. Alright, next we have their 7th studio album from 1980 titled Super Trooper, and this one gets an easy S. This is my number 1 favorite ABBA album. I think this album is perfect. For me, out of all 9 of their records, this is the one that is the most consistent from front to back, with not a single skip over or wasted track. And also in terms of the quality of the songs, I think this album really does a great job of just pumping out one amazing song after the next. This one returns to more of the straight-ahead pop elements that we had heard on Arrival, and we still have some slight disco elements here and there, but certainly not as much as we had heard on some of the previous releases. In the prior year, Bjorn and Agneta had divorced, and because of that, it opened up a new side of them from a lyrical perspective, and we start seeing some deeper subject matters that we hadn't heard from them up to this point. Side 1 opens up with the title track, bringing us in with some beautiful vocal harmonies, and then the groove enters, and we are just off with another beautiful ABBA pop track. Then that is followed by The Winner Takes All, which would be my favorite song from side 1, and this is the song about the divorce that had ensued. I just love the vocal melodies on this one so much, and the piano part is so tasteful and catchy and complements the vocals perfectly, and I think this track clearly shows that going through these tough times really brought out another side of them that gave us some really incredible and memorable songs. Then we change gears with On and On and On, which brings the energy up and gives us a more rocking track. And like I said before, I don't always resonate with this side of ABBA, but this is an example of one of those tracks that I do find very enjoyable. So even on that front, I think they improved that stylistic writing on this album as well, which I'm very happy about. Then we bring it down a bit for a ballad called Andante Andante. And again, another absolutely beautiful track with just amazing vocal and piano parts. And I love the change in pace between the two main sections, with the second section bringing in the drums and being more energetic. Very nice and effective contrast. And then we conclude side one with Me and I, another incredible track. And I would say this is one of the songs that does have some slight disco elements in the guitar and drums, but it definitely doesn't scream full-blown disco either. I particularly love the chorus of this one. I find it so catchy, and the mood is just so peaceful. A perfect conclusion to an amazing side one. Side 2 then opens up with my favorite track from this album, Happy New Year, a perfect ABBA song in my opinion, with everything that I want from them. Beautiful and catchy vocal melodies, adventurous chord progressions, lush vocal harmonies, and very cool instrumental parts and layers. I don't think they could have chosen a better song to open up side 2 with. Then that is followed by Our Last Summer, another perfect and beautiful poppy ABBA track. And up to this point, I really think this album has just been flawless, and the amount of standout tracks is really incredible. Then they change gears a bit with The Piper. I love this song, and I think it provides a really nice detour from the other tracks on this album. This one takes on more of an art rock flavor, and I would say it sounds like a track that could have been on Abba the Album, but still fits in very nicely with the other tracks on here, and it doesn't feel out of place, but rather just complements everything else very well. Another one with a very catchy chorus as well, and I really love the flute on here. It adds such a nice touch. After that, we have Lay All Your Love on Me, which hits us with another hard-hitting and energetic groove with some of those disco flavors. And I love this song, and I think the vibe and the energy is the perfect choice to set up the final track of the album, which is a live ballad titled The Way Old Friends Do. Another one with just gorgeous vocal melodies and an amazing build in dynamics throughout. A very powerful but feel-good track that ends the album just so beautifully. So like I said, I don't think there is a wasted track on here. I think they did a really great job of delivering us a solid batch of tracks on the more poppy side, while also incorporating some slight hints of disco that we had heard on the previous releases, and also giving us a little bit of those art rock elements that we had heard from Abba the Album as well. So I would say it's the perfect blend of everything that they have to offer from their previous 3 albums. And as I said before, this is my number 1 favorite Abba album. In my opinion, this has the most consistent and high quality tracks from front to back. Just an incredible piece of work. This one gets an easy S. All right, moving on, we have their 8th studio album from 1981 titled The Visitors, and this one will also get an easy S. Another incredible album, and this one would go down as my second favorite ABBA album. So towards the end of their discography, I really think they put out some of their best work, and this one, again, changes gears in terms of the general mood of the album and the types of subject matters that are covered. At this point, both couples are divorced, and it resulted in an album that had a more darker overall mood, as well as very introspective subject matters covered from song to song, ranging from the divorce to politics and war and themes of getting older and watching your kids grow up. Really amazing lyrical writing throughout this, and as you can probably tell from my other reviews, I'm not somebody who always pays a ton of attention to lyrics. I've always been much more of a music guy, but this is an album where I will read through the lyrics from track to track, and they really do an amazing job of articulating where they were at in their current state of when this album was made. It opens up with the title track, which is actually a political song, and it's a protest song against the mistreatment of dissidents in the Soviet Union. A great track, and also a very interesting choice of subject matter to open up the album with, making it clear that this is not going to be your typical ABBA album, and this is going to explore some new territories that we were not used to hearing from them. Then they follow that up with Head Over Heels, a perfect second song with a mood that takes a more mysterious turn. I love the arpeggiated synth sequences underneath the dark chord progression, and the vocal melody is super tasteful with a great blend of arpeggios as well as chromatics. Great groove during the chorus too, just really an overall incredible song. Then we continue with When All Is Said and Done, which details the divorce of Anna Fried and Benny, so another divorce song. I really love this song. This would be my second favorite from side 1. My number 1 favorite though is the final track of side 1, which is titled Soldiers. What what an incredible song, and definitely my favorite song from this album. Everything about this song is perfect in my opinion. The dark opening section has such a cool groove to it, a very tasteful bass line, and then it switches into a slightly brighter chorus, which has some of my favorite vocal melodies of the entire album. Side 2 opens up with a very adventurous art rock song titled I Let the Music Speak, really dark and ominous harmonies and vocal parts throughout it, and a badass opening track for side 2. Then that is followed by another song inspired by The Divorce titled One of Us. Another really beautiful song. I love the synth sounds on this one, and I think this has one of the catchiest choruses of the entire album. Then we change it up, and we actually have a track with Bjorn on lead vocals titled 2 for the Price of 1. I really love this song, and of all of the ABBA songs that have male lead vocals, this is probably my favorite one. And then we have a beautiful ballad titled Slipping Through My Fingers, which was written about Bjorn and Agnetta's daughter growing up. Another perfect and beautifully sentimental song. Incredible vocal harmonies during the chorus as well. And then the album concludes with a mellow, stripped-down ballad titled Like an Angel Passing Through My Room. A very pretty and emotional song, especially for the time it was written, with everybody, assuming that this was going to be the last song that we ever heard from ABBA. And I think it's a great conclusion to an incredible album. And like I said with the previous release, I think from front to back, this album is great. It's got no skip-over tracks, and it's a really great change in mood from all of the other ABBA albums. And I would say this is probably their most distinctly unique album from a stylistic and subject matter perspective. So another great record, my second favorite ABBA album. This one gets an S. Okay, and lastly, we have their 9th and final studio album from 2021 titled Voyage, and I will give this a B. Not a bad album, but I wouldn't say it's amazing either. Certainly, it was a very unexpected release. This was their first album in 40 years, and I don't think anyone had seen this coming. And even though it's not one of the greatest albums that they've released, I'm still happy that they came back after such a long period and gave us a final batch of 2021 ABBA songs. We have 10 new tracks, and I would say I really enjoy about half of them. These songs definitely contain those core elements of the ABBA sound, and it still very much feels like them, but I also wouldn't say that I love every single track on here, and if we are comparing it to the rest of their discography, it doesn't have any songs that I would regard as any of my favorite ABBA songs, but like I said, I would still rather have this album than have it never be released. And following up their previous couple of amazing albums, after 40 years of no music, it's certainly a hard task to come back and make an album, and under those circumstances, I think that they did do a relatively good job with this. When I first put it on, I was really optimistic after hearing the opening song, I Still Have Faith in You. I really loved that song. I think it's one of the highlights of the album, and it's an incredibly beautiful and strong opener. I love the vocal melodies and the way it works over the piano progression, and it's got some beautiful string arrangements, great use of dynamics, all of the classic things that I look for in a great ABBA song, and it opens up the album on a very strong note. And I enjoy the follow-up track as well, titled When You Danced With Me. It's a nice pickup in energy after the slower opener, and again, another one with very pretty vocal parts and a nice instrumentation. I like the Irish vibe that we're getting, and I like the production on this one. I think it has a really nice full sound. Then we have another ballad titled Little Things, which I think is a pretty good song, but not one of the standouts on here for me. And the fact that it's a Christmas song, I think, throws the pacing of the album off a little bit. I think putting a Christmas song on an album that's not a Christmas album is kind of a bizarre choice, and also putting it so early on in the track listing just kind of throws everything off. But then after that, we have Don't Shut Me Down, which would be one of my favorite tracks on here. This one has a really nice groove to it, and of all the tracks on here, I would say this one probably has the most resemblance to a 70s or early 80s ABBA track. And I would also say the same thing about the follow-up track, Just a Notion, that takes on a similar flavor, but I wouldn't say that I like it as much as Don't Shut Me Down, but still a pretty good song. So up to this point, I would say that the first 5 tracks are the high point of the album, and now from this point on, this is where the momentum does start to die down a bit for me. There are definitely a couple of skip-overs. I'm not the biggest fan of I Can Be That Woman or Bumblebee or No Doubt About It. And unfortunately, I do think that the second half does take away from this album a bit. I do love the closing track, though, Ode to Freedom. I think it has really beautiful string writing. The vocal parts are very colorful and tasteful. The chord progressions take some dark and interesting turns, particularly when it lands on the augmented chord. And this would probably be my second favorite track on here. So in my opinion, the opening and closing track are the two highlights. And in between that, we have a couple of songs that I think are very good, like Little Things and Don't Shut Me Down. But unfortunately, it does have a good amount of skip over tracks, and side 2, like I said, does lose a good amount of momentum for me and takes away from the album. But in the midst of that, I'm still happy that they released a 9th album, and I do get a lot of enjoyment out of the individual songs that I do like on here. So not their best album, but still pretty good for what it is, so I will give this a B. Alright, we did it. We went through their 9 studio albums, and this is what I came up with. I'm sure there will be plenty of agreement and disagreement on certain takes, particularly with where I rank the first 3 albums, because it seems like everyone has slightly different preferences when it comes to those. And then the albums that I put in A and S tier also seem to be kind of all over the place, depending on the listener. But all in all, after some thought, I definitely think this is an accurate representation of how I feel about their discography. And when it comes to female-fronted groups, I would certainly consider them to be one of the greatest of all time. And they've produced countless amazing hits and albums, and they are just a band that I cannot say enough good things about. So thank you so much for listening. I hope it was enjoyable, and if you are interested, feel free to check out some of my other tier lists, which will be linked in the comments and the description, and see if there's anything else that you might like. Alright, that is it for today. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you at the next video. Take care.